Very good. Thank you very much indeed. 3 nice talks. Started very positive. Mark, it works. Measurable benefits. Paolo, these are the sorts of characteristics organisations need to have if they're going to do this. And then it kind of dipped down a bit when Warren talked a bit about the Open Budget Survey and the fact that so few countries actually publish the data. Nice to see UK at the top of one of these charts occasionally. But yes, I thought it was all very positive until that point. But you did rescue it at the end by saying the bricks are in place. We need the political will now to build the wall. So we have about 25 minutes for questions. The way that we do this is we try and take 3 or 4 questions or comments one after the other and try and make them comments rather than questions, although you can, of course, direct questions back at the speakers. We'll see how we get on. We try and go from one end of the room to the other because we have a roving microphone which needs to follow the speakers around. I'll come back to the speakers to give them a chance to comment at the end. This is on the record. It is being streamed direct to the internet, and there will be a report on the ODI website in 48 hours. Just bear that in mind when you speak. And when you speak, please stand up, say your name. If you want to say where you're from, that's a bonus, and then make your point. And there should be some microphones around somewhere. Here we are. So who wants to start? Right, Karen. Then you, and then Fletcher.
Thanks. I'm Karen Christensen from Publish What You Fund. I'd love to hear a bit more about the off-budget stuff. You can guess that I'm particularly interested in the aid transparency parts of it, but particularly whether there's anything, or whether we could do anything around mapping against the level of transparency, something about the nature of donors, the types of donors, the types of aid coming in. Is there anything that you can start to pick up around that link and a bit more details on that link? That I think there's something instinctive in lack of transparency about donor behaviour in aid transparent countries, facilitating lower levels of budget transparency, or at least not encouraging improvement. But is there anything that you can sort of start to see, or that we could explore more about the nature of the type, whether it's the types of donors, are there donors that are better or worse at this, pattern of aid, instruments? Is there anything like that that you're picking up, or we could try and explore a bit more?
Very good. Sort of donor behaviour. Does anybody want to talk or ask questions or make comments about donor behaviour? We pursued that idea for a while. And then we'll come back to you, Fletcher, okay? You were talking about something different, were you?
Yes.
Okay, so a little bit, explore that a bit more about donors.
That was something that I thought of while you were talking about this, because...
Can you say who you are?
I'm sorry. I'm Natalie Patrick Knox, and I'm a research assistant here at ODI. In looking at this, it seemed like the case studies that you examined were necessarily focused on more domestic or grassroots civil society involvement and domestic budgets. But I was curious whether anybody thought that this sort of budget transparency or civil society involvement could be carried up, the lessons learned from the domestic organizations could be carried up to the global civil society level of influencing donors and their involvement there.
Okay, and was there another hand up in the front talking about donors? Yeah?
In fact, I just got asked.
Oh, okay.
Do you mind passing me that direction?
Okay, then we'll come back over here, Jeff. Yeah?
My name is Gwen Barry from CAFOD. We've been trying to work with numerous partners, the local civil society organisations, on budget work, and something we found is the credibility of the civil society organisations that are working, and particularly find if donors are pushing governments to open up to civil society, you can create a problem. And a particular example is Ethiopia, where the government doesn't see externally funded NGOs as legitimate actors and holding them to account. And that's been the kind of problem and has caused the backlash. So we're looking now more about how do you interrelate with those non-traditional NGOs like the social movements who have more legitimacy in the eyes of some governments. We've been working with the Farmers Association in Mozambique, at a very local level trying to look at decentralised funds. But the real problem we're coming across there is just the chaotic nature of the budget process at a decentralised level, that the local government doesn't even know which budget lines things are coming from, that the local plans are not clear, and when you try and pin something down to a budget, it suddenly morphs and becomes part of a different budget line. So I wonder if there's any lessons from your case studies to illuminate how we deal with that situation.
Okay. Very good. And it was still about donors and donor influence. Okay, let's take that. Anybody else want to talk about this thread?
My name is Purna. I'm from Nepal, and I've recently moved to the UK. And I would like to just comment, and also would like to hear more. I was an active member of civil society organizing Global Capital Education, and I also led a tour. I work for VSO International, and we went to Malawi and Zambia to learn about the civil society. And I'm eager to know the role of donors communities, in fact, in your study, where often being a member of civil society organization back in Nepal, we always had a problem with resources and kind of things. So in your study, was there any difference whether the donors who provide, where the donors provide some money for civil society organizations so that they are able to engage in this monitoring? So the differences. Thank you.
Should we just get some responses to those questions fairly briefly, if you can, focusing specifically on donor behaviour, the impact of that nationally, globally?
Should I?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm just going to sort of say a couple of things rather than try and really respond to some of the comments there and then the questions that were asked. There's a little bit more about transparency and donor behavior that we address in the report. There's a section for recommendations to donors which actually partly overlaps with the recommendations for donors that I spoke about in my presentation and that are included in the briefing paper. The idea there is that clearly, especially in low-income aid-dependent countries, donors play a big role in the sense that they can finance up to half of public spending, and therefore whatever they do in terms of pushing governments to be more transparent and being more transparent themselves can actually make a big difference in terms of the percentage of public resources that are that have information published on them, and sort of the degree to which domestic accountability can be more effective. I just want to highlight one issue, which is the issue of inevitably, at least in sort of current aid debates, there's an emphasis on ensuring that aid flows are so-called on budget, meaning captured in budget documents, in budget processes, and so on. Leaving out many of the things, and often in this debate, there's an immediate translation between aid being on budget and some form of budgetary support or programmatic support. In my view, and at least in some of the things that we say in the report, there's a lot that can be said and done to turn any aid modality, regardless of whether it is budget support or program lending or project aid, that can actually enhance the degree of transparency and accountability that it's sort of the standards of transparency and accountability that it lives up to. And in this, there's the sort of the effort is on the side of donors to make sure that whatever aid modality they utilize, they do it in a way which is more compatible with country systems in terms of adopting compatible budget classification systems, adopting sort of budget calendars that are timed in order to be compatible with country-level budget calendars and other similar things, which might seem pretty petty and sort of small in their significance, but which, in my view at least, can make a huge difference in terms of making sure that all of these public resources, which basically count as public spending in low-income countries, get captured in the budget documents and are opened up to public scrutiny. The second issue that I just want to quickly highlight, and which I briefly mentioned in my presentation, is that at least in the 6 case studies, we only had one sort of low-income, aid-dependent country, and even though basically all of the 6 organizations that we looked at were partly externally funded, only in the Uganda case, it was probably a situation similar to that of Nepal, where it was a sort of a multiplicity of donors supporting civil society organizations trying to do budget work. And certainly in recent years, there's been a flurry of new initiatives interested in supporting this kind of work. And again, sort of our main point in this respect is that in order to effectively support this kind of work, one needs to recognize its nature and the fact that it is a longer term activity which needs very specific sets of skills which can only be built over a certain time horizon, and which need to give the organization enough flexibility and reliability of funding in order to reach its effectiveness probably a few years down the line, which is again some of the changes that Warren has highlighted in the work that IBP is carrying out. But that's enough for me.
Warren or Mike, would you like to comment on Gwen's point, which is that actually donor pressure to try and be more transparent may be counterproductive in certain countries?
Well, yeah. Donors can play a more important role in this, but it's difficult to really understand exactly how they might play that role, so they don't fall into the kind of problems that you face. I mean, two sides of the problem for us is one, on the donor side, if we speak to people in the bank and the fund, for example, their initial response is, well, this all sounds great, we think accountability is important, but the country governments are our clients. Actually, they're our primary clients. So we'll try and feed what we can to civil society on the side, but still that's our primary relationship. And we find very little flexibility in dealing with that. On the other side, from a civil society point of view, is how do you construct asks, particularly of multilateral donors, that don't simply revert back into the conditionalities that we had in the 70s and 80s. One of the ways that I think we might be able to get out of this is, instead of having conditionalities around budget transparency throughout a loan process, is we might think about working with donors around criteria or thresholds for which loans might become appropriate in the first place. So pre-loan thresholds. And there are, I think there are opportunities in the guidelines of both the bank and the fund to do this. And hopefully that gets away from both the client relationship problem and from the conditionality problem. Of course, the longer term problem is you want to do it in a way that the country is going to own this, and it's going to build public financial management systems and effective oversight in the long term. But that's one thought on how you might get beyond it. I was also thinking about your question about how you deal with the problem of chaotic budget systems. And one way to think about it, and it comes across very strongly in the Uganda story, but it's a lesson that we've learned in Vietnam, for example, in Honduras and Burkina Faso, is that civil society is good as a monitoring agency, but civil society is also very good at collecting data, and particularly data on budget implementation at subnational level. And often national government and the Ministry of Finance in particular cannot collect that data themselves. So while the budget process may seem chaotic to you, it's also rather chaotic to the national government. And so that's one of the ins that civil society might use to establish a legitimate threshold for themselves and to begin to get at least parts of the central government onto their side.
Can we leave it there,
Yeah.
maybe, Warren?
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to add anything?
very briefly, a couple of things. I think there's a major opportunity in budget support, and this is where the potential of budget support to act as a channel for dialogue and influence matters, and to build in more explicitly measures which improve the transparency of the budget process and the utilization of resources through the budget, I think could be very powerful. And the second point is, I think, investing in, and this relates to the specific points around aid off budget, is investing in government capacity to monitor and make public the aid they're receiving. I've just had on a brief visit to Bosnia-Herzegovina and was astounded to discover there, for the very first time, there's been an aid coordination secretariat created within the overarching state authority to gather up the material, to make it widely available through CD and the internet. These kind of investments in terms of the supply side can make a big difference. And in relation to the wider value of this kind of work, I'm going to make my pitch now, since it's probably my only chance. And I think we need something called Publish What You Raise. There is enormous potential to complement the kind of work that we've been talking about today on the spending side of the budget with comparable work on the tax side. And I would argue that we shouldn't get overly or exclusively preoccupied with aid, particularly in those societies which already have considerable either own tax or own resources, often through natural resources. And there's an obvious link here to some of the work of Revenue Watch, but I'm not only talking about natural resources, I'm talking about tax. And there's enormous potential here for civil society organisations to get frontally involved in tax revenue, and the incidence of taxation on different groups in society.
Very good. Thanks a lot. We've got time for another round of questions. Fletcher, you had one, and then so we've got three right down here, and some hands over there as well.
I'm Fletcher Tembo. I'm a research fellow here at ODI. I actually manage governance and transparency fund program, which is on strengthening citizen demand for good governance using evidence-based approaches. Two quick questions. The first one is on the participation issue, which I think is Mark who came to that, and where you kind of look at it from the grassroots end of governance, where, of course, we are looking at these good organizations who are able to do good research, do good policy analysis, but what happens beyond them? Did you get a sense of how some of that work translates into actual citizen engagement? So that if you took away the organization, you could find active citizen engagement on the particular budget or aspects of budget, or should we say they are on the aspects of the budget process where we expect citizens, or we call it ordinary citizens, to do it. And
can we just have one question, because that's quite a big one, yeah?
Okay.
Another people. You want to say something?
Jeff Hanley, Centre for Aid and Public Expenditure here at ODI. Paolo, I'm glad you raised the issue of Uganda being the only low-income African country in the 6-country sample. I appreciate that it's not a sort of random sample, it's very purposive, but isn't there an extent to which we're sort of seeing here a model of supply-side remedies for budget transparency when really we want to have a demand-side solution, and the answer is really, have a middle class. I don't want to... can we get anywhere with that, with the ongoing work the IBP is doing in terms of fleshing out where the demand side factors come in and where they can interact more with the supply side factors? And I suppose that also speaks to Mark's point about publish what you raise, because a lot of the tax bargaining that drives civil society focus on revenue raising presumably arises because people are paying tax in the first place, and donors aren't providing rents that substitute for tax raising by the state, and that sort of state development that goes along with that.
Very good. And we'll take it over here.
Thank you. My name is Valerie Leach. I work with Rapport, which is a research institution in Tanzania. Can we talk a little bit more about chaotic budgets, please, and the limits to the political will that may be there to make the budget documents publicly available? Some budget documents are made available, but they're in a format that is completely incomprehensible. And would it not be a useful use of civil society resources to work perhaps more closely with parliamentary committees, especially the public finance committees of Parliament, so that they are able to better understand, translate the budgets that are being presented to them? They understand them better themselves, and through that process, that documentation is made more publicly available too.
Very good. we'll get round. Okay, we've got 3, 4. Let's take it along that row, right over to that corner. They can pass it amongst themselves. Thank you.
Hello, hi. My name's Matt Cole, and I work for the National Audit Office. And I particularly wanted to pick up on that last comment because I help with what we call our technical cooperation team. What we do is that we help to try and build more capacity within SAIs, but increasingly now kind of spreading across ministries of finance and also public accounts committees. And one of the projects we're just starting in under the umbrella with Westminster Foundation for Democracy is something which is exactly that we're going into countries and helping their parliamentarians to build skills of actually financial scrutiny in expenditure and in budgets. And, and one of the main things is to try and make this sustainable, to actually train in-country partners, to recognise in-country partners, can then carry this on once, our funding is finished. So, just to say, it is happening.
Very good. Valerie, nobble him afterwards.
Hello, my name is Anton Kerr from the International Aid Line. The presentation of the book comes at a very timely time from us in relation to the AIDS response, because a lot of the AIDS funding for AIDS has come via mechanisms like the Global Fund and PEPFAR, where it's really easy to track what the money's for and the impact that it has and allow accountability. But there's been a real move against disease-specific funding, specifically coming from DFID, and a push towards championing budget support. And that's been illustrated through the formation of the IHP and how that goes forward. So the struggle for us is that we're potentially losing the potential to track and show the impact that funding has and the very open and transparent mechanisms we have through things like the Global Fund. But the formation of the IHP potentially can form policy space for dialogue at a country level. So, for example, because the IHP primarily wants all the donors to work together to deliver a health plan, there's the potential there to insist on policy space for civil society engagement to be able to track the funding that's there for health and the impact that it has. What I'd like to know is, what are the because we've been pushing in our engagement with the IHP for civil society engagement, and we managed to achieve that, let's say, at a global level through engagement and research, but at a national level there's a general commitment to supporting civil society engagement. But what are the specifics? What I'd like to know is, what are the specifics we should be calling for in the architecture that the IHP is trying to create at a national level?
Very good, thanks a lot. And then I think there were 2 right over that side, and then I think we'll come back to the speakers to round up.
Helen Tilly from SOA. I've got a particular methodological comment stroke question about the shifts in expenditure priorities that was commented on earlier in the presentation. Were there any attribution issues that arose when you were looking at that? For instance, I'm thinking of whether there are any wider changes in the broader political economy that were differentiated from the particular activities of non-governmental public actors, and whether that was something that you had difficulty separating out, or if it wasn't an issue, that's also a question. Thank you.
I think we'll make I think there were 2 over there. I think there were, or just one. Maybe just one. Okay, let's have that one, then we'll come back to the speakers.
My name is Barbara Dutzler. I come from GTZ. I have a question on the hypothesis chain that you have, kind of the input and transparency, accountability to output and outcome, where you mentioned the expenditures not being wasted and non-corrupted. And I have a short example to that, because when I was in Cameroon, I evidenced how dynamic citizens, as they call themselves, help the legislator understand an incomprehensive budget document, tell them which questions they should ask. And they did so, a question of Ministry of Finance. But then again, there is a lot more than just to education. There is the political context, the system. If you simply have a one-party system, you can't really expect the legislators to question the Ministry of Finance too hard. because it's your government you're questioning. There's a lot there in terms of culture. To what extent can you really kind of be in opposition apart now from the political system? There's a wide way of like political economy factors. So when you're saying that you look more into the nuances and the context, that's something I'd really think is very helpful. Also in understanding, the problems that there are, or the hindrances or the risks, if you want to follow through the hypothesis chain that you have. Thanks.
Very good, thank you very much indeed. Let's just, should we come from the far end of the table this way? So, Mark, Warren, Paolo.
Good point on method. I think they anticipated that. I mean, yes, absolutely, attribution matters. I think the best we were able to do with the evidence we have, not having a pure baseline, was to be able to triangulate insights from a wide variety of observers, politicians, officials, other civil society actors, academics, to try and account for why there was an observable trend towards a higher proportion of the budget being allocated towards this particular end in Gujarat. It was the only one of our cases we could do that in. So we weren't able to actually do that with the quantitative evidence we had across the other cases. This was actually the exception rather than the norm. The lesson of this, I think, was reflected in what Warren said to you just now, which is the importance of now creating a baseline to allow a much more precise monitoring of the factors to measure attribution more effectively. So as I said, these were indicative as opposed to absolutely something you could generalize from and demonstrate certainty. That's the important at that point. The point about committees, if we'd had more time, we would have given you some richer examples to confirm exactly the points I'm making. I would put translation almost. The power of civil society organizations to interpret, simplify and translate complex, scattered, poorly summarized official data into easy digestible form. In Gujarat, the organization used to do precisely that using huge, great ledgers, retabulate, summarize into a nice 5 or 6 pager, put it through the post box of the individual legislators the evening before the budget debate took place. A number of instances in Mexico where we saw budget data being produced for and with special committees of the legislature to this enormous power in that particular approach. Finally, very quickly on Fletcher's point, I made this point about participation because I don't think it's entirely realistic to expect citizens to independently mobilize themselves unless there is a very, very direct link to spend. Spend is something that seems to be done to people by governments as opposed to tax being raised from their own resources. I think you will always need mediation to mobilize people to take an active interest. There is a partial exception, and I think there's a legacy of this in some of the panchayat councils where there's a mass movement to underpin this sort of impetus for budget scrutiny at a local level. Disha and Gujarat produced a broadsheet, a one-pager, which went out